This conference will now be recorded.
We'll get started. In yesterday's session, we were discussing about EC2, what is EC2 and its components. So when we create an EC2, right, we need to select an AMI, out of which AMI you want to create a EC2. And most importantly, the instance type, what type of instance you want to create. I mean to say, what should be the hardware capacity of that instance, how much CPU, how much memory you need for that instance. AWS has categorized EC2 into multiple instance types and families: general purpose, compute optimized, memory optimized, GPU optimized, storage optimized. So based on the application you wanted to run in that EC2 instance, you need to select the appropriate capacity, appropriate instance type. And next and very important component here is we are going to select a network, VPC and subnet. VPC and it's a subnet. Basically, the network, under which network you want to create that EC2 instance. And you are going to define the storage, how much storage you need for that EC2 instance to boot the OS. And we will select key pair as well for SSH purpose, SSH key to SSH. And also we will create or select security group. Security group is nothing but a firewall. It's a firewall. And we can provide the tags. You can provide the tags to the AWS EC2 instance. Not only AWS EC2, for any AWS resource which you are creating, you can give the tags. So tags are used for many purposes. So tags, you can consider that as a metadata. You can assign metadata to your AWS resources, right, in the form of tags. So each tag is basically kind of a label. Each tag is a kind of a label, consists of user defined key and a value. Each tag is basically kind of a labels with your user defined key and its value. Tags can help you to manage or identify and organize, or you can search or filter the AWS resources using tags. You can create a tags to categorize resources, for what purpose you are using that resource, owner of that resource, for which environment you are using that resource. So tags can be used for identification, governance purpose, filter purpose. Okay, so AWS resources, you can give the tags. So these are like important components which we will be giving while creating a EC2. Let me show that practically. I hope everyone already has a AWS account. I don't think anyone has a problem to create AWS account, or if anyone still don't have a AWS account, kindly let us know. So I have an AWS account. I logged into my AWS account with root credentials. We call it as a console. This is management console, GUI. AWS console, AWS management console, we call this GUI, graphical user interface. Using this GUI also, you can provision, you can manage, you can destroy AWS resources using GUI also. For now, we are doing via GUI manually. Now, if you see, I am into Mumbai region in AWS Mumbai region. And again, by default, right, one more important thing which I wanted to tell you, by default, not all the regions are enabled for you. By default, not all the regions are enabled for you. You can see, for some people, still Hyderabad region also might not be enabled. Hyderabad region also might not be enabled. So if you see, whatever regions which is enabled for your account by default, which will be like this, and whatever which are not available, it is grayed out and you can't select this region. You can see these regions are grayed out and we can't select these regions. If you see, only few regions will be enabled by default in your AWS account. If you want to enable these regions also, you need to go to this top right corner. There is some option called manage regions. There is some option called manage regions, and you click on that manage region. You click on that manage region, and you can see what regions are enabled by default, what regions are not enabled. You can see some regions are not enabled by default. Even Hyderabad is also, for some people, it is not enabled, right? So I have clicked on enable. I have clicked on enable, so that's why this is enabled for me. So these regions are not enabled by default. So I requested AWS to enable this region so that if required, I can create infrastructure resources, that cloud resources in this region. If you want to create infrastructure in any other region, you need to click on this enable so that request goes to AWS, and they will enable that region for your account so that you can select that region and create an infrastructure in that region if required. Clear? Only these regions will be enabled by default. The above regions will not be enabled by default. If required, you need to enable by requesting AWS. Clear? Now, let me come back to my services section. I will go ahead and create a resources in Mumbai region. I'll go ahead and create a resources in Mumbai region. Again, guys, why I am telling this? Maybe you guys are writing a Terraform script. Maybe you guys are writing a Terraform script. In your Terraform script, you will specify region as something which is not enabled in your account. Does Terraform will be able to create a resources in that region if that is not enabled? Let's say in your account, you have not enabled Hyderabad region, but in your Terraform script, you will provide the region also, right? In which region you want to create. Let's say you will define something like this in Terraform script. I will explain this. Provider, you will say AWS, right? And you will say region. You say something like this. If this region is not enabled, will you able to create a resources in that region using Terraform again? No. So make sure whatever region, in which region you want to provision the infrastructure, that region is enabled in your account, in whatever account you want to provision. Okay. Now let me go ahead and create my instance in a Mumbai region manually. Let me go to EC2 instance. Whatever instances you see here, this is on-demand instances. Whatever instances you see here, this is on-demand instances. If required, you can create a reserved instances here. As of now, I don't have any reserved instance. Or if required, you can create a spot request, spot instances. Again, based on your use case. For now, let me create a on-demand instance by clicking this launch instance. As I already told, you need to provide some input to the AWS to create a EC2 instance. So now, as per the new AWS console, a new version of the AWS console, first it is expecting a tag. As I already told, tags. I already told what is the use of this tags, right? So tag is a label that you can assign to AWS resource. Each tag consists of a key and a value. So tags can be used for governance, identifications, right? All those things. Now, by default, the tag key, they're expecting name. Whatever value you want to give, you can give. Suppose you want to give a tag value. For now, let me give something like this EC2 demo, like that I'm giving. But in real time, it is not like that, guys. For what purpose, for what use case you are using this EC2 instance, for which project, I mean to say which application or project you are using, and what environment you are using, you can add all those labels. let's say you are planning to use this EC2 instance to set up maybe database. Just to give an example, you will give MySQL server like this. If required, you can add the additional tags also. If required, you can add the additional tags also, like environment, for which environment, right? Something like this. Any key, any value, environment, let's say dev environment like this. If required, you can add the owner or manager, that manager who is managing that application or owning that application. Let's say someone like me. So any key value pairs of data you can add as a tags like this for identification governance purpose, right? You can search or you can filter, you can search or you can filter AWS resources based on the tags also. Clear what is tags? I can give multiple tags also like this. Okay, now next and important thing here is what you are selecting while creating EC2 instance. AMI. What is AMI? Yesterday we discussed already. It's a pre-configured package. It's a pre-configured package which contains OS and some softwares and settings. Again, there are different types of AMIs. Community AMI, marketplace AMI, your own AMI, right? If required, using whatever AMI you want to create, you can create. Suppose you can create your own AMI also, kind of a templating. You can use it, image templates, right? AMI templates. Using a packer, you can create your own AMIs with required softwares also. So if I already have a AMI with the OS and required softwares and configuration, if I am using that AMI to create a server, I no need to do any configuration again. I can eliminate that configuration management also, because you already have a AMI with required OS and softwares and settings also. In that case, if I use that AMI, is that server will have all the OS and required softwares and settings as part of that server as per the AMI? Yes. So you can select whatever AMI you want to select as per your requirement. For now, I am selecting Red Hat. This is community AMI. This is community AMI, Red Hat Linux version 9. Guys, each AMI will have an ID. Each AMI will have an ID, AMI ID. So who is managing these AMIs? AWS. AWS is managing. Suppose you guys have to create these EC2 instances programmatically, whether you are using CLI, whether you are using GUI, whether you are using Terraform. Do I need to specify the AMI ID? Out of which AMI ID I need to create a EC2 instance? Yes. So you need to provide that IDs. But here we are selecting internally, it is using IDs. So guys, one more thing before I proceed, guys, whether you are using GUI or whether you are using CLI, whether you are using Terraform, whatever it is, in the background, what it is doing basically, right? This is your AWS cloud, right? Whether you are using CLI or whether you are using GUI, whether you are using SDK, whether you are using other developmental tools, infrastructure as a code tools, IAC tools like Terraform or CloudFormation or Pulumi, whatever you use, IAC tools. In the background, whether you are doing via GUI, that is console, the way I am doing, whether you are using CLI, AWS CLI or Terraform, in the background, what it does, guys, basically, it will make a API calls only. It will make a API calls only in the background. It will make a API calls only in the background to AWS to create or update or delete the resources. But if I am using GUI, is it kind of a manual process? I come to AWS console, select this, select this, select this network as per my requirement, and enable security groups, right? It is a manual process. But whatever you are selecting manually, in the background it's a API call, but same thing I can define in a declarative way. Same thing I can define in a declarative way in the Terraform also. That I will explain later. So how to create all those things later, how to do it using Terraform infrastructure as a code. But first you need to understand manual so that you can understand what components are part of AWS EC2, right? So this information only you will provide in the Terraform scripts. Okay. Now I am selecting Red Hat AMI. I am selecting instance type and key pair. Key pair. So key pair is for what purpose we will use this key pair? In case, if you want to SSH to the EC2 instance. In case if you want to SSH, what do you mean by SSH? SSH in the sense secure shell. You want to connect, I mean to say you want to SSH to that EC2 instance. Suppose maybe you may have a doubt, sir, what purpose I need to SSH to that EC2 instance? For any troubleshooting, any deployment or any configurations you want to do in that EC2, do you need to SSH to that EC2 instance as a developer or as a DevOps guy? Yes. So you want to troubleshoot something, you want to install something, you want to configure something in that EC2 instance, you need to SSH to that EC2 instance. By default, user-based authentication is disabled in AWS EC2 instances. You can't log in based on the password. Password-based authentication. That password-based authentication is disabled by default in AWS EC2 instance. You can't SSH to the EC2 instance using any password because password-based authentication is disabled in EC2 instance. You need to authenticate using PEM file to SSH. So by default, if you don't have a PEM file, you can create a new key. You can create a new key here. You can click on this create new key pair. You can give some name. Some name, right? Maybe something like this, whatever name. And you click on this create key pair. A key pair will be created, and the private key, it's a combination of two keys. Okay, it's a combination of two keys. So a private key will be downloaded to your instance, your server, where you are, the moment you click on create pair, a private key will be downloaded to your laptop or desktop. And when I use this key pair, AWS EC2 will place the respective public key in the EC2 instance. In which folder, in which location the respective public key will be maintained in that EC2 instance? Any idea? In that respective user, in that respective user, there is one folder called .ssh folder. There is one folder called .ssh folder. Under the .ssh folder, it will maintain one file called authorized keys. In that authorized keys, it will place the respective public key of that private key. When we are using this private key, when we SSH from SSH client, right? So it will try to match this private key with that whatever authorized keys we have in the EC2. If there is a respective public key, then only SSH becomes successful. Clear? For what purpose this key pair will be used? What do you mean by key pair? Now, if you don't have a key pair, you can select create key pair and download. If you already have a key pair, you can use existing key pair also. Something like this, existing key pair. Now, next and foremost important thing is network. Under which network you want to create that EC2 instance. Even though we don't create any network, by default, a default VPC is created for us. So when this default VPC is created for us, when this default VPC is created for us, basically whenever we create any AWS account, right? When we create a AWS account, that time itself, a default VPC will be created for us. A default VPC will be created for us. So I am creating that EC2 instance in that default VPC. But let's say my requirement is I want to create in a custom VPC, different network. Is it possible for me to select another VPC if I have already created a VPC? Yes. So you can select that VPC. So even though in your Terraform script, you are trying to create a EC2, if you don't specify the VPC ID in which VPC you want to create, if you don't specify the VPC ID in your Terraform script, when you are creating EC2 resource, under which VPC that EC2 instance will be created by Terraform again? Default VPC only. Default VPC only. If I specify the VPC ID, different VPC ID, Terraform also will create a EC2 instance in that respective VPC ID. Okay, VPC. For now, let me go with the default VPC and default subnets. Now, when it comes to network, there is one more component called security group. One more component called security group. You have two options here. You have two options. I can create a new security group and I can use that security group with that server. Otherwise, can I select existing security group also if I already have some security groups created under that network, under that network, under that VPC? Again, security groups are specific to the region and specific to the VPC. Understand? Suppose I have created a security group in VPC B, can I use that security group to the servers which are going to be created in VPC A? No. So security groups are again region specific and also VPC specific. So if you want to select, you can select existing security group also, whatever is there in that VPC only, that default VPC only. Or you can go ahead and create a new security group. Again, if you guys are not specifying the security group ID when you are creating via Terraform, in which what security group will be assigned to that EC2 instance, there is a default security group also for that. Each VPC will have some default security group. This one, there is a security group with the name default. So that default security group will be used for the EC2 instance. If required, using Terraform also you can create a security group and you can use that security group. But I will explain that later when I explain Terraform. But is everyone clear what is security group? You can create a new security group or you can go with existing security group also. Now, security group has two things, inbound rules and outbound rules. For now, only SSH traffic is allowed. For now, if I unselect this one again, SSH traffic also will not allowed. If I select this one, the port 22, SSHD process will listen on port 22. If you are trying to SSH, to the TC2 instance using SSH client, again, if the port is not opened in the firewall, does the firewall will prevent that connection? Will it block that connection if the port is not opened? Yes. So if required, you can open that port, SSH port. If required, you can open any other ports also. Later also you can open any other ports. Is everyone clear? What do you mean by network, subnetwork, and firewall here when we create EC2? Now, next, one more component is storage. One more component is storage. So this is a root storage. This is a root storage. I already told, right? For what purpose root storage will be used? For booting the OS related files, OS related files. Is it recommended to use root values for data files, data to store in the root? No. So if any data you want to maintain, right, you have to go with additional value. Guys, this root value is also EBS only. This root value also EBS only, and you can create additional EBS value to maintain any data, kind of a persistent data. Suppose I am going to install, let's say I am going to install some software, maybe some stateful application. Just to give an example, let's say I'm going to run some stateful application like a Jenkins, MySQL, MongoDB, Nexus, some kind of a stateful application which will maintain some state. So it is not recommended to use the root storage to maintain that data. You can create additional storage, additional disk, additional EBS volume if required, and you can mount that additional EBS volume with that data directory, so that OS is in separate storage and your data, that stateful application, that can be Jenkins data, database data, whatever it is, in a separate disk. So this is only for root. This is only for root. Again, even though I don't specify, by default it is going to take some 10 GB or 8 GB based on the AMI again. This is for a root value. Clear? What is this storage? For what purpose this storage is used? Now, one more important component here. There is something called user data. In the advanced details, of that section, there is something called user data. What is this user data, right? So you can run some scripts, some commands while creating a EC2 instance. Inside your EC2 instance, you can run some commands or some scripts, kind of a bootstrapping scripts. Can I do some kind of a installation or configuration by passing user data here? That can be any installation or configurations which I wanted to do in that EC2 instance. Yes, but whatever user data I'm going to give, is it going to be executed every time when I stop and start the server like that? No, only once, while creating a server. So user data, what is this user data, right? Specify the user data to provide commands or a command script to run when you launch your EC2 instance, right? User data, for what purpose we can use user data? In case of Linux, AMIs, how to specify user data, like that they have given. So when we launch EC2 instance, you have an option of passing user data to the instance that can be used to perform common automated configuration task. Even you can run scripts, right? You can pass a shell scripts, or cloud init directives also. You can pass some kind of a shell script, right? Whatever you want to do. As a which user, the user data will be executed by default, right? As a root user only, the user data will be executed. So if you are trying to use a shell script, if you want to run a shell script, your user data must start with this one. I hope you can understand what do you mean by this. What is this? If you have to run a shell script as a user data, you need to define this one, that is shebang line. And script entered as a user data will run as a root. So no need to use sudo command. You no need to use sudo command again. even though you use fine, and you cannot include commands that requires a feedback, or that requires a input from the user. You can't include some command that will expect some input or some feedback from the user, because this is an automation, right? This is an automation that will run automatically. If you are executing some command which is expecting some input, is that execution will be halted there only, because this is not a human way you are running the script. So you should not include any command that requires a user feedback, such as suppose you are doing m update or m install. That time it will ask why n like that. So you need to, you should not include a commands that require a user feedback. If you are using something like this, maybe you need to use -y flag. You know, right? What do you mean by this m update -y or m install -y? So if your user data is failed, right? If the user data execution is failed, suppose for some reason that user data, that script has not executed as expected, where you can check the logs, the AWS EC2 will output that log captures. It will capture the log into this location, where log, under that system, where log cloud init output.log. So any script or anything you want to run, kind of a shell script, I can do. If required, can I do something like this? Let's say bin/bash. This is my cbang line. If required, this is Red Hat instance, apt install. Can I do something like this, git, or whatever softwares or whatever I want to install, like this also, maybe Java, Tomcat. You can run multiple, you can run a complex script also. Just to give an example, I am running like this. Is everyone clear what is this user data? Now here, number of instances, how many instances you want to create with same specification, with same information, with same specification, how many instances you want to create. Let's say if I want to create 3 instances, I can say 3 like that. I can say 3 like that, with same, using same information, using with this tags, using this AMI, using this instance type, using this key pair in the under that network, with that security group, with this user data. If I say 3, how many instances, how many EC2 instances will be created now? It will create 3. Or if I say 10, it will create 10, like that. Now let me create only one. Guys, in the background, everything is an API. In the background, everything is an API. Let me show that. That is not required, but let me show that. The moment I click on launch instance, there is a request going to the AWS. So request went to some AWS API with some payload. This payload is basically this information, under which VPC, under which region, using what AMI, all these things, right? All the information. So it is making some calls to create a EC2 instance. It is making some calls to the AWS to create a EC2 instance. Okay, in the background, everything is an API only. Now, if you see, when I go to instances, can I see that EC2 instance? AWS has assigned some ID, instance ID. Now it is getting initialized. So again, you can see something here, 2 by 2 checks. Again, you can see something here, 2 by 2 checks. What do you mean by the 2 by 2 checks? There are two types of status checks. What is the 2 by 2 status checks, right? Sometimes you see 1 by 2 checks passed or 0 by 2 checks passed, like that. If anytime you see that 1 by 2 checks passed or 2 by 0 by 2 checks passed, in that case, do you have some issue with that instance, with that server? If sometimes you see 0 by checks passed, 0 by 2 or 1 by 2 checks passed, like that, which means there are some issue with that EC2 instance. So what is the status checks? There are two types of status checks it will perform. One is system check, one is system check, another one is instance check. Another one is instance check. You can see, let me select this EC2. Let me go to status checks. Let me go to status checks. And if you see here, status checks and instance check. So status check detects underlying hardware, underlying physical server problem. So that status checks, right? AWS that status checks, this system status check, right? That AWS system status check. So that system status check is going to check the health of the underlying hardware, whether is there any issue with that underlying hardware, which means is there any power outage to the underlying server, that underlying that physical server. System status checks monitor AWS system, that hardware on which your instance is running. So it may detect loss of network connectivity or loss of system power or any hardware issues on the physical host, that physical server. That system status check. That instance status checks, right, at a instance level, at a VM level. So is EC2 instance is exhausted out of memory? Is that EC2 instance is running out of memory? Or is there any corrupted file system? Or is there any OS file or OS configurations is corrupted, like that? It will detect. So if the status checks are showing successful like this, which means there are no issues with instance as well as that host, that hardware. Clear? What do you mean by this 2x2 checks? Now I have a EC2 instance. The details I can see here. At high level, I can see these details: instance ID, public IP address, private IP address, right? What type of instance is this? Under which VPC it is created? Under which subnet it is created? Using which AMI it is created, right? What key pair has been used? All these things I can see under details level. Under security section, is there any IAM role attached to the EC2 instance? I can see. Or the security group, what is the security group which is attached to that server? Under that security group, what is the inbound rules and outbound rules has been opened? I can see. When I go to the networking related, private IP, public IP, VPC, subnet ID, where it is created, what network interfaces has been attached. These network interfaces are nothing but NIC card, network card. So which will enable the network to that instance. Now storage information. As of now, we have only one storage. What type of storage is that? The root storage, the root device, EBS. EBS, where OS is booted. Like this, you can see status checks also. Yes, please be on mute. Like this, you can see status checks and monitoring. AWS, by default, there is one monitoring service called CloudWatch. There is one monitoring service called CloudWatch. CloudWatch is monitoring that instance. CloudWatch is getting the metrics of that instance. By default, detailed monitoring is not enabled. So only every 5 minutes, it will get the metrics. But if you enable detailed monitoring, you can see the metrics at 1 minute interval also. But detailed monitoring is chargeable again. So, and you can see the tags also. If you see, I have given multiple tags. By looking at this, can I understand for which environment this server is used? The name tag only, whatever value you give for this name key, that will only displayed here. And by looking at this, I can understand this is for MySQL, the manager of that team is someone like this. Identification. Not only identification, you can apply a filters. You can apply a filters also based on the tags also. Based on the tags also, you can apply a filter. So you can say, let's say, whatever resources have a tag like environment, tag as a environment, right? And a value as a dev, like that also I can filter. So I can filter something like this also based on the tags also. Environment, whatever has that environment like this, right? I can select the filters. I can query also based on the tags like this. So is everyone clear? All the details, networking, storage, status checks, monitoring tags, all these things on this EC2 instance. Now, as I already told, right? As I already told, your server may have a public IP as well as private IP. But private IPs are only routable or reachable in a private networks, not in the internet. Not in the internet. In real time, we may create a servers in a private subnets without public IP. Without public IP. Most of our servers will be in a private subnets only, like application servers, database servers. If you guys are using Kubernetes, your Kubernetes nodes. If you guys are using Docker Swarm, your Docker Swarm nodes. If you guys are using RDS, that RDS instances. If you guys are using EKS clusters, that EKS clusters will be in a private subnets only. To prevent, to make sure the communication is secured, the network security, right? But as of now, this is in a default VPC. All the subnets are public subnets. We got a public IP. Now using this public IP, can I reach some process which is running in this instance? As of now only SSHD process. That SSHD process is running. So using any SSH client, you can use a lot of SSH clients. You can use a lot of SSH clients like Putty. You can use MobiXterm. There are something called lot of things, lobby, like this. Lot of things are there. You can use git bash also, but this is not designed for SSH purpose. Git bash is designed for what? Git bash is developed and designed to interact with GitHub repositories. To interact with GitHub repositories. But people are using git bash also as a SSH tool. But git bash is basically to interact with your GitHub repositories, to commit the code, pull the code, push the code, create branch, merge branch, for that one only. But you using git bash also you can SSH, because SSH command works there. But pure SSH clients, Putty, Super Putty, MobiXterm, like this, there are a lot of tools. If you guys are using Windows, system, Windows laptops or desktops, you can use Putty, MobiXterm, Lobby. But PowerShell, you can use PowerShell. Directly in PowerShell also you can execute SSH commands, guys, in PowerShell directly. If you guys are using Mac, Mac has a inbuilt command prompt that we call it as a terminal. Mac terminal. If you guys are using Linux desktops, guys, Linux also comes with the desktops. Okay, I am not sure whether you guys familiar, aware about this or not. So there are Ubuntu desktops, Ubuntu, Ubuntu desktop. If you guys are using Linux desktops, Ubuntu desktop, Ubuntu also has a GUI version. Ubuntu desktop. If you guys are using Linux desktops, again, you no need to go with any tools like this, because there again your shell. So Linux desktop comes with shell, bash shell or sh shell. Using that sh shell or bash shell, again you can execute SSH commands. Is everyone clear? If you guys are using Windows, if you want to connect to the Linux, You can use SSH clients like this. If you guys are using Mac, from Mac, if you want to SSH to the Linux machine, you can use terminal. If you guys are using Linux desktops, you can use shell. From Linux servers to Linux servers also, can I use shell only? From Linux servers to Linux servers, SSHing from one Linux server to another Linux server also, can I use shell only? That shell, bash shell or whatever shell. Yes. So using SSH client, you can SSH for installing, troubleshooting, configuring all those things. For whatever purpose you want to use this EC2 instance, you can use. I have just given tag as MySQL server, but do I have a MySQL software configured in that EC2 instance as of now like that? No. So for whatever purpose you want to give, you can give. For demo purpose, I have given MySQL. Okay. Now let me SSH. Let me SSH to this EC2 instance. So I am using SSH command. You should have this PEM file. You should have this PEM file. So I have a terminal. I have a terminal in my Mac. This is my MacBook. I have a terminal. This is my local laptop. This is my local laptop. I am not into any SSH, any server. So this is my local laptop. This is my local laptop. Okay. MacBook. MacBook. iOS. Okay. Now let me execute this SSH command in this terminal. Now I am getting some error, no such file or directory, because I am using, is it a relative path or absolute path? That the PEM file path I am using, right? That PEM file, is it relative path or absolute path? Linux basics. It is a relative path. So it's a relative path. So that PEM file is expected. That PEM file is expected in my system where I am executing this SSH command, because I am giving a relative path. In that current folder where I am executing SSH command, it is expecting that PEM file. So I don't have that PEM file there. If required, I can go into that folder. I can change the directory into that folder where I have this PEM file and I can execute that command. Or if required, can I give absolute path also? Wherever I am in my local laptop, if required, I can give absolute path also. Absolute path, that is Linux basics, you should know. Okay. For now, let me go inside. Let me go inside some folder where I have that PEM file. That PEM file is there here in my current folder in my local laptop. Now, let me execute that SSH command. Now SSH process is completed successfully. Now am I in the shell of the EC2 instance? Am I currently in that shell, that shell process of that Linux server, that is EC2 instance? Yes. Now whatever installation you want to do, you can do here. Whatever configurations you want to do, you can do here. Whatever troubleshooting you want to do, you can do here. If you see, as of now, how many block storages, how many disks, how many block storages has been attached to that server? Only one. And again, there are four partitions. Again, there are four partitions, but so this block storage is mounted with this one. So can I consider that as a root storage, root volume? The directory, root directory is mounted with this one. Can I consider this as a root volume where OS related files are booted and stored? Yes. Now, for whatever purpose you want to use this server, you can use. You can do the required installation, setups, deployments, all those things. Clear? What is EC2? How to create EC2? What are the components of EC2? Now suppose you want to configure some web server here. I can install maybe whatever software like Nginx, minstall Nginx, minstall Nginx -y. So it is installing Nginx process, right? It has installed that Nginx software. But if you see, I have just installed, but Nginx is not started. Nginx is not started. I have just installed. If required, I can start it as a service also. Guys, you should be comfortable with all these things because I am not teaching Linux, package managers, all those things. So I'm just demonstrating AWS resources. So sudo service Nginx status. So as of now, is Nginx process is running? There is a service file also created here. No. So if required, I can start. I can start like this. Now you can see the status is Nginx process is running on this process ID, and you can see something like this also. These are Linux basics. These are Linux basics, right? Process related. Do you see Nginx process is running on that process ID? Now what ports are being used by what process in this system? If I want to check what command I can use, what ports are being used by what process, which means on what port which process is listening, which process is working. How to check? What command we can use? Linux again. Netstat command. Netstat command. Netstat command you need to use. But before I show there, if you observe, is Git is installed in my system? Is curl is also there? Is Vim is also there? How come all these things got installed? How come all these things got installed? Because we have given the user data. We have given the user data. So if user data execution is failed, right? You can check the logs in where log folder. There is some file called cloud init output.log. Cloud init output.log. You can see the content, whether that script that user data is executed or failed like that. So without any issues, it is successfully completed that installation. Curl software is installed, Git software is installed like that. Now, for now, I have installed Nginx also. I have installed Nginx also. After SSHing to that server, I have started Nginx. Now, what ports is used by which process? Basically, server will have a process. We are creating a server to run some process. Understand? We are creating servers to run some process. Can I run my application process? Can I run my database process? Or can I run my web server process, container process, Kubernetes process, whatever, Tomcat process, Jenkins process, Nexus process, that application, right? So what process is used on which port, right? You can check using netstat command. If you see netstat-tulnp, but by default you don't have this one. Let me install that sudo yum install net tools software. Now if you see, let me use sudo. You can see port 22, which process is listening or working or listening or accepting the request on port 22. What process is accepting or listening or running on port 22? SSHD. And if you see, I have installed Nginx. Is Nginx is listening or accepting the request on port 80? Yes. Now let me access from outside also. Let me access from outside using the TC2 instance IP address. Let me, I just not used MySQL. Let me say something like this. Now let me take this IP. Even though I don't specify the IP, when it comes to this web HTTP protocol, web browsers works on HTTP and HTTPS protocol. What is the default port request goes? Even though I don't specify the port, that is 80 only, port 80. but I am not getting a response. I am not getting a response. What could be the problem? Do you think there is no process, web process, application process, that web process is running on that server? No, it is running locally. I can see, right? Locally I can see curl -v. I have a curl -v local host. I am trying to check locally. Locally, am I getting a response? That Nginx homepage 200 response I am getting without any issues locally in this system. Locally in this system, it is working fine. But why I am not able to reach remotely? Because remotely there might be a problem with the network, or there might be a problem with firewall. Now the problem is with firewall. Port needs to be allowed. So let me open the port here in the security group firewall. Let me edit inbound rules. Let me add, I can open port 80. If I open something like this, I already told, I can open for some range, network range. If I have opened like this, now there is a EC2 instance. There is a EC2 instance in my account where I have installed Nginx process and it is running on port 80. Now one of the client is trying to reach this one, and this client IP, this system IP, this client IP or this system IP is something like this. Just to give an example, here in this security group, right, in the inbound rule, port 22 is opened for this source. Do you think this guy can reach, even though there is a process running, even though there is a network here? No, because only this range, for this source range I have opened, but not for this. If required, I can open something like this also. If you see, even though port 80 is opened, I'm getting connection timed out. Connection timed out. You can understand what do you mean by connection timed out. Okay. Now let me open for now everywhere. I hope you can understand 0.0.0/0 represents any IP. Any IP now. Now, if you see, am I getting that response, that Nginx homepage response, something like this? This is Nginx homepage response. So is everyone clear? What is EC2? What is security group? How it works? For whatever purpose you want to use that EC2, you can use. That is just a server. You can use that server for running web process or application process or database process, or maybe Nginx or HTTPD, Jenkins, Nexus, SonarQube, whatever it is. It's up to you as per your requirement. Now, this is one of the EC2 instance. So here it is running on HTTP. Okay, browser will work on HTTP, but internally TCP is also fine. TCP layers. This is at what layer? Because HTTP is the top layer. Internally, it can be TCP also. Request. I hope you should understand that OSI layer models here, guys. You should understand what do you mean by that OSI layer. So you have a 7 layers. Application layer. Application layers works on HTTPS protocol. Network layer works on TCP. So basically, even though you are accessing via HTTP, internally it is going via TCP only. Is everyone clear? What is EC2? What are the components of EC2? How it is working? If everyone is clear, let me explain next set of services. Storage related services. We have some storage related services also. So EC2 is a computing power. EC2 is a computing power, compute server. That server requires storage. So there are some storage related services, but there are types. First, let's understand the storage types. Let's understand the storage types. So we have some types of storage. One is block store, another one is file store, another one is file store, another one is object store. Block store, file store, object store. So this block storage in the background, it's a SAN technology. This file store is a NAS, network attached storage. This is block store is a SAN, storage area network. So when we guys are using this block store, right? When we guys are using this block storage, whatever file, whatever data or file which you are trying to store in that block storage, that file will be splitted into multiple piece of blocks, and each block will be stored in a different path in the storage. If you are trying to store some file in the block store, single file, that file will be splitted into multiple equally distributed blocks, and each block will be stored in a different paths in that storage system, different paths in that storage system, and each block will have a unique identifier to retrieve back. So when we are any application or your OS is again requesting that file, any application or any like that OS or that application running in that system is trying to request that file, access that file, the storage system again, it will gather all the blocks from that storage system and it will assemble that file and send it back. So what is the advantage with this block storage? You will get a better IO. Better IO. What do you mean by IO? Input and output operations you can carry very fast. You can do lot of input and output operations on that storage, on that disk. So if you understand block storage, right? So it can quickly read and write the data from that block storage. So the better performance you will get. So block storages are widely used for various use cases. Block storages are widely used for various use cases. For booting the OS also. OS, that OS related files, right? OS is also booting, that OS related files also getting stored in the block storage only. Our VM disks, our VM disk, that server disk is there, right? That root disk, that is again a block storage. And not only VM disk, suppose you want to install some database and you want to maintain the data of the database process. So database also will carry lot of writes, read and writes to the disk, right, to the storage. You might be installing some database in that such system. The database will internally use some directory, kind of a working directory, where it will read and write the data to the disk. So that whatever working directory of the database, you need to mount with some block storage so that it can do lot of read and write operations quickly. So block storages is widely used for booting the OS or for database storage, wherever you need very good IO. And file storage is like a network file system, NFS or SMB protocol. In case of Linux, NFS protocol. In case of Windows Server, you can use SMB protocol. So shared file system. Suppose you want to have a shared storage. You want to share the same storage with multiple instances. You can go with this NAS, network attached storage. In case of Linux, that NFS protocol. In case of Windows, SMB protocol. Network attached storage, basically NFS, network file system, kind of a shared storage. But without mounting this block storage and file storage, Will you able to read and write the data to that storage from your servers, whatever servers? No. So you need to mount that storage. You need to mount that storage to your instances. Then only you can read and write the data to that storage, whether it's a block store or whether it's a file store. But there is something called object store. There is something called object store. There is something called object store. Without mounting also, you can access the data from anywhere. Without mounting also, you can access the data from anywhere. So when we are uploading, this object store is basically works based on HTTP and HTTPS protocol. Basically, it's a API. The storage is offered via APIs. Okay. So when we are uploading objects to the object store, each and every object will have a unique identifier and unique endpoint. Endpoint is nothing but a URL. Unique endpoint, unique URL. So you can access the data, you can access those objects from anywhere without mounting also, using that object endpoint or object IDs. And there are services available. There are services available in AWS to offer this type of block store, file store, object store also. What service is available, which is they are offering block storages? What is that service in AWS which is offering that block store? There is something called EBS. 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 The full form of EBS is Elastic Block Store. The full form of EBS is Elastic Block Store. And for file store, what services AWS is offering? There is a service called EFS and there is a service called FSX. So this EFS, Elastic File System. Elastic File System. In the background, NFS protocol. It's a network file system. For Linux, file store for Linux. File store for Linux servers. Suppose if I need a file store for Windows, they are offering FSX. This works on SMB protocol. This works based on the SMB protocol. So it's a file store for Windows. It's a file store for Windows. They are offering, it's a file store for Windows, Amazon FSX. File store for Windows servers, Windows systems. Now, there is a one more service they are offering for object store. What service is that? That is S3. S3. The full form of S3 is a simple storage service. It's an object store. It's an object store. If you observe, even though I have not explicitly selected, is easy to internally used EBS for that root storage where it is booting the system? Yes, that is the root value. You can go and check here. If you go to this server, if you go to the storage, you can see, right? You can see block devices. How many block devices are there? How many block storages are there? How many block storages? One. If required, you can SSH and execute some command also. In this server, you can execute some command to see the list of block storages. You can execute lsblk. So there is one disk that is mounted with root. That is mounted with root. So that is the block storage. Now, if you see the way you have instances, there is something called EBS, Elastic Block Store, and you have values. You have a values. You can see there are some values. Some values are attached to the servers. You can see Most of the values are root values only. You can see dev/sda1, dev/sda1 like that. It is showing that a dev/sda1 is the device name, right? So you can see each and every server, right? There are values. There are values. Each and every value is attached to some instance like this. Some instance like this. These are the root values. If required, can I attach additional values also to my EC2 instance? And can I mount that additional value with some other folder also if required? For whatever use case, for whatever use case you want to do, for whatever use case you want to do, yes. So by default, that EC2 instance has one value, that is root value. Most of the times it will be a EBS value. Now this is mounted with what? This is mounted with root value, the root directory in case of Linux. In case of Windows, what is the root? I told already yesterday. C drive. C drive is the root. Suppose here I am installing some software. Just to give an example, suppose here I am installing in software, MySQL software or Mongo software, MySQL software or Mongo software, whatever you want to install, right? You can install. Softwares will be part of root only, but Mongo or MySQL will generate some database files, right? Your applications can talk to the database. Database is going to store the data, tables, columns, records, all those things. The database may generate some files in some directory. So what I can do, I can attach, I can create some additional value. I can create some additional value and I can attach this value to this EC2 instance. And I can mount with whatever directory. Let's say Mongo database is generating the data in this folder, data/db. I can mount this data/db directory of this server with this storage. Software is running as part of root only, but that software is generating the data and the data directory is mounted with this storage. So do I have a data separately from softwares and OS? Yes. Now, even though your OS is corrupted, this root value is corrupted, but still they have a data safely available in another storage, right? Yes. And even though you terminate your EC2 instance, by default only root values will be terminated, which means the root storage gets deleted, but additional storage it will be still there. It will be still there. If required, again you can create a server, one more server, again you can install Mongo, again you can attach the same storage and again you can mount so that you can recover your data. It's a state. Clear? You can attach additional values also. Guys, I'm explaining some AWS concepts. So this is nothing to do with Terraform. So using Terraform, can I create a EC2 instance like this? Yes. I can create a EC2 instance like this. I can do like this also. I can do like this also, but this attachment, right? Attach I can do, but again, attach I can do. I can attach the storage to this server also. I can create a one more disk and I can attach the disk to this server also. But that mounting, you need to do it somehow by executing some commands in this code. I mean to say by executing some commands in this server, that mounting you need to do. But if required, I can create a server with additional storage also, but mounting, somehow you need to run some commands inside that server to get mounted. Clear? What is EBS first of all? Forget about that mounting and all those things. What is EBS first of all? Is everyone clear? What is root value? What is additional value? Like this. Now, I am not taking any software. I am not taking any software. Let me quickly create some additional value. Let me create some additional value manually. I am going to the console. I am going to the console. I can create a value. I can create a value. And again, when it comes to volume, when it comes to volumes, there are types of volumes again. You can see general purpose, provisioned IAPS, magnetic, HDD, like that. You may have a doubt. You may have a doubt. Sir, storage, what does it matter? If I select magnetic, or if I select SSD, or if I select HDD, how does it matter? If it is an instance, I can understand based on the CPU, based on the memory, the power, how powerful your computer, how powerful your server is based on the CPU and memory. But what does it matter when it comes to storage? Let it be magnetic or let it be HDD. What does it matter? How quickly, you can read and write the data to that storage matters here. So magnetic is very old storage technology. Magnetic is very old storage technology. Do you have a better IO or throughput if you go for a magnetic storage? No. So HDD also kind of a old hard disk drive. So that is again old. Now latest is SSD, solid state drives. Even though when you are purchasing the laptops or desktop, even though you don't know what is what, are you guys checking whether that laptop is having SSD disk or HDD disk like that? Even though you don't know what is that, but still you prefer. Why? Because SSD give better IOPS, better IOPS. So if you guys are using SSD laptops, SSD disks in your laptop or desktop, if you guys observe, the moment you click on that power button, within a fraction of seconds, like 10-15 seconds only, is it able to boot the OS completely without any lag? Yes, because there is a very good IOPS, input output operations per second per GB. So based on your use case, you can select. Again, there is a GP2 general purpose, GP3 general purpose. So provisioned IOPS. So which one will give again better performance when it comes to lot of input output operations you want to carry on the disk based on the software you are running? You need to go for a provisioned IOPS IO2. Provisioned IOPS IO2. Provisioned IOPS again. In general purpose again you have a SSD general purpose, provisioned IOPS SSD, like that. If you see here, they are giving 3 IOPS per GB. If you go for a general purpose, they are giving 3 IOPS per GB with minimum baseline of 100 IOPS. Suppose I can create a disk with 1 GB also, but they have baselined 100 IOPS, but 3 IOPS per GB they will give. Suppose you need more IOPS per second, right? You need to increase the size. Now if I take 300 GB of storage, how many IOPS I will get? How many input output operations I can carry per second per GB on that disk? 900. So if you go for a general purpose GP3, again minimum 3000 IOPS, up to 16,000 IOPS you will get. Suppose even though I am giving just a 10 GB disk storage, am I getting more IOPS, which means will I have a better performance when we are reading and writing the data? When I go for a general purpose GP3, yes. If I go for a provisioned IOPS again, 100 IOPS per GB, sorry, 50 IOPS per GB, 50 IOPS per GB. If I go for a provisioned IOPS IO3, 1000 IOPS per GB, you will get more IOPS. So the performance is based on the volume type. The storage performance is based on the volume type. Clear? What do you mean by this type? Now, based on your use case, you can select. So even though it is not relevant here, but let me ask some questions. What is the minimum value, maximum value of the CBS volumes? These type of questions comes again. If you guys are attending AWS related interviews, They may ask these type of questions: how much, what is the minimum and maximum storage of EBS? So minimum, you can see here itself, minimum how much? 1 GB. Maximum how much? Maximum how much? 16 TB. 16 TB. When it comes to general purpose, GP2, GP3 same. GP2, GP3 same. When it comes to provisioned IOPS, minimum 4 GB, maximum again 16 TB only. But when it comes to provisioned IOPS IO2, what is the maximum capacity of that EBS storage? How much storage I can create? 65 TB. 65 TB. Sometimes in the interview they're asking this question. Sometimes in the interview they're asking this question. For demonstration purpose, I am just creating 5 GB capacity. 5 GB capacity I am creating. General purpose 5 GB. And one more important, EBS is a zone level service, which means in whatever availability zone I have that EC2 instance to which I want to attach that EBS value, in same availability zone I need to create this storage. In same availability zone I need to create that storage also, that EBS value. Let's say my EC2 instance, my EC2 instance, my EC2 instance is there. Let's consider this is in which availability zone that EC2 instance. Let's see in which availability zone that EC2 instance is there. 1A. Suppose if I want to attach that EBS value, if I want to attach that EBS value to that EC2 instance, make sure you are creating that EBS also in a same availability zone. If your EBS value is in a separate availability zone like this, do you think this value can be attached to that EC2 instance which is there in 1A? No. Make sure it is there in a same availability zone. Let me select 1A. Let me give some tag, something like this. I'm giving whatever tag you want to give, you can give. I'm just giving additional val like that. Now there is a volume created. Volume created, but it is available. It is not attached. It is not attached to that any instance. It is not attached. It is still available. So I can select this value, go to actions, attach value. So to which instance? Whatever instance. Let me attach to this instance, Nginx server. Leave the device name. Don't modify anything. Click on this attach value. Now this value is also attached to the same server, Nginx server. Now if I go to that Nginx server, now how many storages I can see, how many block storages I can see. If I go to that Nginx server storage section, how many storages I can see, how many disks I can see here? 2. Let me go to this server also. Let me execute lsblk. Now can I see this 5 GB disk, 5 GB storage to this one? Yes. But disk is attached. But is mounted with any directory of that server? Is that used with any directory as of now? No. If required, can you mount with whatever directory which you wanted to mount as per your requirement? Yes. For now, let me create some dummy directory. Something like this I am creating. Now this one, I don't have anything here, and that is not mounted with any, this directory is not mounted with any storage. So whatever files which gets created programmatically or manually under this directory, since this is not mounted with any specific storage, will it be part of root only? If I create any files manually or programmatically under this directory, that will be still with root storage only, because that is not mounted with any separate storage. If required, can I mount this directory with this block storage of 5 GB? Yes. So to do that, first you need to format that disk. First you need to create a file system, because this is a raw storage. This is a raw storage. We don't have any file system. You don't have any file systems created under that disk. So you need to format. You need to create a file types. You have ext4, you have ext2, you have xfs, like that. I am formatting with ext4 type. Now let me create. Now you can see there is a file system, file ID, like this. Now I can mount sudo mount /dev /xvdf with the directory, whatever directory I have created. So the directory name which I wanted to mount is EBS demo. That is part of /home, like that. I can give full path like this also, /home EBS demo, like that. Now if you see df-kh or lsblk, you can see, right, this directory is mounted with this storage. You can see like this also. This directory is mounted with this storage, block storage. Now any data that gets created under this, any data that's created under this, right, will it be maintained? Will it be stored actually under this additional disk, additional storage? That does. Whatever disk you have mounted, yes. So let me create some file. Let me create some file. I'm manually doing something like this. I'm manually doing. So permissions problem, because I have used sudo. If required, I can change the folder permissions. Because I have used sudo, that's why permission problem. If required, I can change the ownership recursively for that EFS demo for whatever user, like this. EC2 user, EC2 hyphen user. Now let me create a file. Something. Now whatever file you see here, this test.txt is actually stored in this storage, because we mounted this disk, directory with that storage. So is everyone clear how to create additional value? And if required, you need to execute some commands to mount that. Making a format and mounting has to be executed inside that server. Clear? What is additional EBS value? How to attach that EBS value? Guys, again, this is a temporary mount. This is again temporary mount, right? If I stop and start the server, that again, that storage will not be mounted again. This storage is not mounted with this directory again, because this is a temporary mount. So I hope you know how to make this mount permanent. We discussed in the Linux, in other full AWS program also we discussed. So in which file you need to make an entry if you want to make that mount permanent, which means even though you are rebooting that server, that has to be automatically mounted. You have to do it in etc fs tab file. You need to do it in etc fs tab file. So is everyone clear what is EBS value, how to create additional value, how to attach and use that value? So from here I'll continue tomorrow, guys. From here I'll continue tomorrow. Tomorrow at high level I will explain what is EBS snapshot. At high level I will explain what is EBS snapshot. Okay. Then I will explain S3. Tomorrow we'll conclude EBS and S3 also. Any questions? Any queries? Feel free to ask. Otherwise I'll continue tomorrow. Or are we going to discuss how to create a AMI also? No, Naveen, I'm not going to discuss. My main focus is Terraform, not AWS. Okay. I am discussing AWS because to refresh your concepts. Without knowing this AWS, if I directly go for a Terraform, you don't understand. Okay. So the focus, the main agenda of this training is Terraform, not AWS. Okay, but I am discussing AWS services to refresh your knowledge again, because you might have forgot what is what again. Thank you guys. That's it for today. I'll continue tomorrow with EBS snapshot and S3. See you tomorrow. Guys, try to practice all these things, okay? Manually. First, understand what is this. Create it manually using GUI. Later, you can automate using Terraform, infrastructure as a code. Okay. Thank you, guys. We'll continue tomorrow. Make sure you are practicing whatever I am discussing every day quickly, so that you can up to speed when I go for a Terraform. Thank you.